days are over. They ended last night. So I have to say, I never thought, growing up, my parents used to always want me to get haircuts. I never wanted to. Now I couldn't. I definitely want to. So we have two parshas together, Vayakhel and Perkudei. Now, interesting enough, if you look at the last 4 or 5 parshas, same thing. You know, you have one parsha, it talks about keeping Shabbos. The next parsha talks about the sin of the golden calf. The next parsha talks about keeping Shabbos. The next parsha talks all about the Mishkan. That's where we are now. And the next parsha speaks about Shabbos. So it goes, it says Shabbos, the sin of the calf, Shabbos, the traveling temple, and then Shabbos. It's funny, right? 5 in a row, and you sort of see a sequence, right? 3 Shabboses, right? In between the first 2 is a sin of the idol worship of the golden calf, and in between the last 2 is the really establishment and finalizing of the portable temple. And the commentaries discuss this because it's a significant point. There's something to keep in mind in general. Well, we're dealing with 2 very important concepts here. One is Shabbos, and one is the Mishkan, which is, the Mishkan is the temple, the Beis HaMikdash, that we have in Jerusalem. But before they had it in Jerusalem, it was traveling through the desert with them. So it had a different word. It was called the Mishkan. But it's the same, pretty much a similar idea. And our commentaries teach us that what Shabbos is to time, the temple or the Mishkan is to space. That is to say that Shabbos takes time, which is regular time, just like we have all the time, 24 hours a day, and imbues it with holiness. That's what Shabbos is. It's God's day, so to speak. It's the day where the day has holiness. And you take the Mishkan. The Mishkan is a place. It's a location. When it travels, it's one thing, but let's say it's in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, it's just a place. It's dirt. It's a ground. But because the temple is there, it imbues space with holiness. So now you have these 2 concepts which are interacting in these parshas here of time and space, places, right, locations and times. And that how God has made it that just like we live in a mundane world, but that the Shabbos comes and tells us that time can be made holy, and the temple comes and tells us that space can be made holy. And what does it mean it makes holy? Holy is a very poor word for it. But what it means is that it makes it, first, is unique, something that is kadosh, which is the Hebrew word for holy. Kadosh, it means, one of the basic meanings of it, there's many meanings, and they all apply. But one of them is that it's unique. For instance, Shabbos is Kodesh. It's a unique day. You have 7 days. Every other day of the week, the Talmud says, has a partner. Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, right? So Friday and Sunday. You could say whatever the partners are. But Shabbos is the 7th. It's the odd number, right? So too, we have space is also, right, has a uniqueness. And it comes from the word kadosh. For instance, one of the words in ancient Hebrew for a prostitute is a kadesha, which you would think means she who is holy. Is not that she's holy, she's singular. She's self a woman to be used for a singular purpose. She has no family. She has no family life. She is simply used for a particular purpose. So she's set aside, or she sets herself aside. She's unique. It's not commenting good or bad, that word, in the case of her. In the case of holiness, of course, it's a positive, but it's saying that there's a uniqueness. Like the Jewish people are singular, God is singular, Israel is singular, right? They're all one, they're all unique, and they're all kadosh, they're all holy. So one understanding of that is that there's something that is unique and singular that has some aspect of holiness. Also, that it is set aside for a special purpose. The Jewish people were set aside from other nations of the world, that we should be the moral educators of the world. We should, by example and by teaching, should be able to show the world how to be moral. That's why it's such a serious sin when a Jew or a Jewish community does something wrong, right? Something illegal, let's say, and we call it a chilul Hashem, which is literally means a secularization of the name of God. It takes the holiness in the name of God and makes it secular, makes it mundane, because you destroy the holiness. If you look at a Jew and you say, there's an example of an ethical person, of a moral person, of a person I want to be like, so then that person is sanctifying the name of God. They are kadosh. If that person is defaming the name of God, if they're involved in illegal activities, if they're immoral, if they steal, if they speak poor, in a low way, if they treat people, they're racist. These types of things are all examples of a person who we don't want to emulate, right? And if a Jew does that, it's not just a person doing it; it's the teacher doing it, right? You can imagine you go into a class, and we have a belief in Judaism that if you want to teach something, you have to be a follower of it. So there's a famous story about one of the is an author and a poet in England who also taught at Oxford. He taught ethics, and he got caught having an affair with one of the students. And they said to him, "How could you do this? You're a teacher of ethics." And he said, "You don't have to be a triangle to teach trigonometry, and you don't have to be a zebra to teach zoology." Meaning, you don't have to be ethical to teach ethics. That's the common belief that people have. You can teach university and teach religion and not believe in God. But we as Jews believe that you have to. That you have to be a living example of what you teach. Otherwise, what you're teaching has no meaning. It's, if I look at you and you're teaching, I remember, for instance, we had a very good friend 30 years ago, was my wife's doctor. And he was a obstetrician gynecologist. But he came from that generation where people smoked a lot, and he smoked, and he died of lung cancer. And he was a lovely man. Like, I really liked this man a lot. He was such a wonderful person. But he used to say it to me quite regularly that people don't take me seriously when I talk to them about their health because they know I smoke. And no matter how much I try, I haven't been able to quit. He's a human being. But you can see how it took away from who he was, because here he's telling you you can't smoke because it's bad for your health, and he smokes, right? Now, on the other end, he should be able to say, "I know firsthand that it's bad for you." It's like it's like when you go to the gym and everybody in the gym is like they look perfect, and I don't look perfect, or we don't look perfect, and we go into the gym, we have to say like there's something wrong here. They all look great. I don't look great. But what they're really showing you is the effect of it, right? I'm the trainer, and I'm going to be in good shape because I'm going to show you how to be in good shape, right? If I have a trainer who's 300 pounds who tells to me how terrible it is to be overweight, he knows, right, how terrible it is to be overweight. But he also, right, is not going to get listened to because he is overweight. So it's the same idea here, that the idea of kadosh, being holy, means that you're unique and that you're set aside, that you do this thing that you are teaching. So if we were teaching ethics and morality, then we have to set ourselves aside from the rest of the world and say that we are moral. It doesn't mean that we exclude ourselves from the world. We're involved with the world. Otherwise, who are we teaching? But we say to ourselves, I'm not going to get involved in pornography. I'm not going to get involved with prostitution, with white slavery, with illicit drugs, with cheating on my taxes, or like the example I use all the time is parking in the fire lane. I'm not going to do these things because it shows that I don't really believe what I'm teaching. And these are examples of it. So the Torah teaches us that you have not only people are holy, which we know for sure, we have the ability, but God has imbued even time and space with holiness. Yes.
The most effective teachers or trainers or counselors are people that have been through that but have succeeded in overcoming that, as opposed to someone who's never been.
That's why we say that a Baal Tshuva, you have a Baal Tshuva, a person who repented, or a person who wasn't grace observant, but it really means someone who repented. He did something wrong and repented, versus a righteous person. Right? It says that a righteous person will not stand in the place of the Baal Tshuva, because the righteous person never tasted sin. Right? That's not easy, right? To actually, from the time you're a child to the time you're 120, to never have anything unkosher, right? That's pretty hard to do. You really discipline yourself. But the other person who didn't keep kosher and then chooses to, right? He fights that experience he went against very hard. And people are always the ones who are the easiest to learn from because you see it, right? I see it like when I talk to people who are in careers like mine where we are in the public a lot, and that there's a lot of the success of my work it has to do with how I work with people, I deal with people, but some of it has to do with how people perceive me, even if it's not accurate. And so until, I don't know, I guess it's like 12 years ago or 10 years ago, I was about 60 pounds overweight. And I finally taught myself, I'm not 20 anymore. I've really got to stop this. So the time I was a child to the time I was probably almost 50, I was on diets my whole life. Like I could tell you about every single one, going all the way back to the grapefruit diets, like in the 50s and 60s. I know all of them. And I did them all ever since I was a kid. And finally, I said, I have to find something that works and make it work. And now when I talk to mentor younger rabbis, I say to them, you have all the skills of being a rabbi, and it should not matter if you're overweight, but it does. Right? It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. But I can tell you firsthand that my career was held back because I was. I know for a fact. And I see when you meet people who are very overweight and you treat them seriously, you have to struggle. And it's sad, but that's how human beings are. One of the reasons we've spoken about before, and people find it hard to understand, Kohanim have all these rules. Who they can marry, for instance. Kohen can't marry a divorcee. That's a known law. The Kohen Gadol has to marry a virgin. Only the Kohen Gadol, the high Kohen. We don't have that today. But so you said a Kohen who has a physical impediment cannot practice as a Kohen. Like he can't work in the temple. So the Talmud gives examples. If he has one arm longer than the other, right? I have one arm longer than another because I dislocated my shoulder. My arm is that much longer. If you have one eyebrow, those are examples. So you say, you have a Kohen, he's a righteous man. He dedicated his life to helping people. And you're going to tell me he can't do it and he can't do it because he has one eyebrow? Like he has a unibrow? That's it? He can't do it? And you say, that's just not fair. It's not fair. And God's not telling us that it's right that happens. God's telling us that's how people are. If I go to the temple and I want someone to offer a sacrifice for me who is representing God to me, that's what they're doing. I'm giving him my cow to offer as a sacrifice. You are now accepting this on behalf of God. You are going to do the act for me. And he has some type of flaw. It affects me. Now, it doesn't affect him. It affects me. I'm flawed. I see that, just like I said, with the person who's overweight, I see this Kohen is not perfect. And therefore they made all these rules. And it's not right. God is not saying it's right to be that way. God said it is that way. It's a physical reality. Until probably the late 60s, when a woman was divorced, she was looked down on. It was her fault. And I remember I was a kid. You only met a few, but a divorcee meant there was trouble. That's not true. I know it's not true. Women can make the same mistakes as anyone else and marry a crazy guy, and he's totally the problem. Even though it's probably never the case, where one is always the problem. But he could be 90% of the problem, and nobody thought twice about the man. They thought of the woman, something wrong with the woman, and that's what the Torah is telling us. There's nothing wrong with the Kohen, right? He marries a divorced woman. There's nothing wrong with a divorced woman, but people think so. So therefore, in the role where you were representing, he had certain rules. Say he had to be above reproach, even if there was nothing really wrong. Even if what's wrong with having one arm longer than the other? It's just you don't appear perfect. Big deal. But it makes a difference. The fact that the rabbis should have the congregation does. It's a fact.
But isn't
a doctor who smokes, it does.
Yeah, but isn't it like the word's not ethical? But isn't it against what we're supposed to say that
it is?
Then then it's not right.
No, I understand. They're using it only. The only time that you see that the Torah even discusses this is in areas where perception is extremely important. It doesn't do it with the average person. I wouldn't say a rabbi shouldn't marry a divorced woman. It doesn't say that, because integrally there's nothing wrong with a divorced woman. But the Kohen. Now look at this. A Kohen wears a uniform. He is the only person in the Jewish world who wears a uniform. You do not see in the Torah that a person in the military wore a uniform. They might have, but it wasn't prescribed. The only one is a Kohen. Why is that? Because a Kohen, when you go to the temple, you are not going to see Joe Cohen. You're going to see the representative of God. It makes no difference which Kohen comes to the door when you walk in. They're all the same. They look the same, they dress the same, they act the same. They are representatives of God. That's who they are. When they're working, they are not individuals. They are uniform.
But then wouldn't God make all the Kohens
The fact is that if they're not, I mean, it's the flaw lies in the eyes of the people, not of the Kohen. And so since
find a flaw with anything or anybody.
Well, so the Torah defines it.
Right.
The Torah defines. Of course, you could have a guy who tells stupid jokes. He could be vulgar, right? Then he's still allowed to be a Kohen.
Right. But
we're talking about specific perceptions. Because here he is the only time you have anywhere in Jewish tradition where you have the Talmud asks a question: who is the Kohen representing? Is the Kohen representing the person to God? Like, I'm taking your cow and I'm bringing it to God, or is he representing God to the person? Which side is the Kohen on? Right? Either he's accepting your cow, right, on behalf of God, because God's not going to stand there, right? It's not going to happen. The Kohen is the physical manifestation of the agent receiving it on behalf of God.
then why wouldn't they all be physically perfect if they're God's representative?
So God's saying they're human, so they're not going to be perfect. But when they represent me, because people will perceive them differently, then they have to appear perfect. Your real question should be, really, is why doesn't God create people to not be that way? To not, right?
And then nobody would be able to.
Well, we would just say, it's an innate thing. No matter what culture you are, there are certain things that people have no control over. Right? In China, it used to be right that girls were disfavored. Right? Did the baby have control over what gender it was? No, of course not. So and they killed it, or they didn't want it, or they would do whatever they could to change it. But so that it's a reality. You have these perceptions that are wrong, and our job is to teach people that they're wrong.
So that doesn't apply today. That was just years ago, obviously.
Well, we don't have a temple today, right?
But we're not teaching them they're wrong because we're not practicing what we preach.
No, we are teaching that it's wrong. We teach that you should not judge. Not only you should not judge a widow or say a divorcee badly, but in many cases you can see Jewish law went out of its way to treat them with extraordinary sensitivity. Like in the whole world, they had ideas of marriage and divorce. Like, one of the main concepts that Jews are supposed to teach the world is the idea of marriage and divorce. It's one of there's an idea that non-Jews should get married. They should have monogamy. Even if they believed in more than one wife, they should have husbands and wives. That's up to them what their culture dictates. But they should do it. There should be exclusivity between people. It's one thing we're supposed to teach them. So we should teach them this. Now, every nation had, look in history, you see they had marriage and divorce, right? But every nation, when it came to divorce, basically the divorced women were destroyed. They had no way of making money. Women in almost every culture of the world were not educated. They were illiterate. They had no way to make money. They were abused. And now you're suddenly not married, and you maybe even have children, and you're living in the street. It's horrible, right? The only culture that addressed that was Judaism, where the rabbis invented thousands of years ago what we call the ksuba. The ksuba is not a beautiful wedding document that's all pretty and love and this. It's a document that the rabbi said, we will not marry any man to a woman unless the man is prepared to take care of her if there's a divorce, and we're going to enforce it. So if you want to get married, you have to sign this paper. The woman doesn't sign the paper. That's why it's always funny when the women say, I want to sign it. They want to show. I said, what are you going to sign? You're going to support your husband if you have a divorce? That's what you want to do? This whole document was made because the world was abusing women. And we said, we're not going to do that. We're going to make a document that shows that a divorced woman must be supported, must be treated with rights, must be treated with dignity, and must be. This was when women in other cultures were bought and sold like animals. And the Jews were saying, you cannot do this. You cannot treat somebody badly. So you see that while at the same time there was the culture allowed for some disparaging ideas of women, Judaism as a lifestyle, as a religion, even as a civilization, when we lived in a theocratic society that was run by Torah, didn't allow it. It just didn't let it happen because they fought every way we could against it. This is thousands of years ago. Like for thousands of years, rabbis were forbidden to marry a man to a woman unless they would sign the paper. That's a rabbinic law. We're not allowed to do it. And the truth is, if I would do it without making him sign it, they would be married. Right? Marriage is marriage. It's just the rabbinic law came and said you can't do it. You can't perform a wedding unless they do this. But if I would perform the wedding, they would be married. So you see that the rabbis intervened very seriously. And the Torah does it too, like with widows and orphans. It keeps repeating over and over and over again. You have to treat the stranger, the widow, and the orphan with extra sensitivity. And it says, and the Torah has a very strong line. It says you have to treat them with such sensitivity that if you do not treat them with this extra sensitivity and care for them and make sure that they're taken care of, then your wives will be widows and your children will be orphans. That's what God says. And he curses you to death if you don't do this. That's how serious it is. So you see that the Torah and the rabbis of course get it from the Torah, are extremely sensitive to people that culture has sidelined, has made them less. By the people, yeah, but not by the Torah. Right. But it's sort of like, you have certain things where women walk behind the men in traditional societies, in traditional Jewish society. You'll see it in Israel, right? That it doesn't say in the law that women have to walk behind the men. It doesn't say it. It does say that a man shouldn't walk behind a woman because it'll cause him to leer at her, not because she's less important than him. It says, better you should walk behind a lion than a woman. Because a lion can turn around and bite you. But if the woman doesn't turn around, you can start thinking of her as a sex object because you're walking and you're looking at her from behind. So it says you shouldn't do that. But nowhere does it say the woman has to walk behind a man. Nowhere. But the cultures that we lived in for 1,000 years in Poland and in Russia, they all did this. The women walked behind the men because the women were subjugated. Right? That's changed today in modern times, but Judaism was very traditional. So you find that these traditions are followed, but not for the reasons that they were done. It's not because, like I tell people all the time, you really think, they say to me, Orthodox women, they're subjugated and they're forced to dress in a certain way and they have to do what their husbands say. So I always ask them, take the Torah and the prophets and the writings, which is our seminal book of Jewish life. Show me one woman in there who is subjugated or who does what she's supposed to do. I said every single example, every single one, they do what they want to do. And you have Sarah telling Abraham what to do, and God telling Abraham, listen to your wife, everything she says is right. You have Rivka lying to her husband and saying Jacob is Esau, Esau is Jacob. Right? That's Rivka telling her own husband. And you have Rachel telling her sister Leah the secret so that she shouldn't get embarrassed when their father switches them and Yaakov marries the wrong sister. Yaakov anticipated it. He set up a series of passwords with Rachel. So if she said the password, he knew it was Rachel and he'd marry her because he knew that her father was up to something. And so Rachel didn't want to embarrass her sister, so she told her the password so that Yaakov would marry the wrong sister. These women don't do what they're told to do. They do what they think is right. That's Jewish tradition. And Anybody knows Rebbitzins, you know that they don't do what they're supposed to do. They do what they think is right.
Well, I think the Torah has a lot of strong women who made a difference in our lives.
It has only strong women who made a difference. And that's why sometimes you wonder where were other women. They had two sons. So who did they marry? They had to marry somebody. Right? Where did they find women? If everybody came from Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve only had these two sons, who did they marry? They didn't marry the mother, so who did they marry? So that explains to us that there are many people the Torah doesn't talk about because they didn't do something that we need to know. So clearly, they had children. They married somebody, right? We know there were other people, that Adam and Eve had other children. We know that they did, right? And later on, it tells us about some of them. But if that person doesn't play a role that you and I need to know in 2018, the Torah is not going to tell you, right? That's not a history book. It's not a book of genealogy. It includes history and includes genealogy if it's to teach you ethics. So that's the case. But therefore, when it shows you just about every woman in the Torah is a self-thinker, she does what she thinks is right. They are extraordinarily filled with strength and faith. We can say without a question that every single time in Jewish history that the Jews were about to be destroyed, they were seriously destroyed, the men gave up hope and the women saved them. It's Esther, it's Devorah, it's every single case throughout history. We know the story of Hanukkah, we were saved because of women. Purim, we were saved because of women. Miriam really plays an extraordinarily role in the story of the extent that Moshe would not have been born if it wasn't for Miriam. It was because of Miriam that Moshe was born. So if it wasn't for Miriam, we would have had a whole different story of what happened. Every one of them is like that. And nevertheless, the society we live in still causes people to think inappropriately. Like the whole, this whole movement that's going on where men are abusing women and women are now saying we're not taking it anymore. There's no question it happens among Jews too. It happens among religious too. Right? We're taught not that. And we have punishments when men do these types of things. Right? And the Torah takes into account men have the disposition to do it. And we can ask the question, why doesn't God just make men not do it? Take away men seem to have a tie between power and intimacy. Right? I have power over you. I'm stronger than you, so then I can be intimate with you, and you can't stop me. Right? Men seem to tie those two things together sometimes, while women, I don't think, do. And when men do, they abuse women. So why doesn't God just make it that we don't have that? So whatever reason, God wants us to have it, but he doesn't want us to do it. He wants us to struggle against it, to fight it. So we shouldn't do it. So that we should be able to say, I choose to treat women as equals as they are equals.
But isn't it worse in the Orthodox community because they know better? They've been taught, they've learned all of this. In the secular community, they may not have the knowledge, but they Orthodox do.
Well, I think
know it and not do it is even worse than not knowing.
Right. I think that it's not much worse in the Orthodox community because this is sort of something everybody knows. But we definitely know it. That's why we have all these rules. I think I spoke about it a few weeks ago, that one of the reasons why I won't go, like in my office, I will meet with women all the time in my office, and it can get pretty intense. They can be in tears, and I can be in tears. I mean, we can be very, very emotionally intimate. But I have a glass door on purpose because I do not ever want to be tempted. And I can tell you, while I'm not going to say I'm personally tempted, but there is a strong relationship between trying to make someone feel better and physical intimacy. And therefore, it's very common to have this transference between two people, so that Judaism teaches us you can't be alone with a person like that. You can't be in any room or any place where you have an expectation of privacy. You can't do. So if I close my office door and have the blinds down, I have an expectation of privacy. No one's going to walk in on me. Nobody's going to do anything before they knock. Right? So I can't, if that's the case, I can't meet with a woman in there. Not because the women are going to do thing. I am, right? Would I? I really hope I wouldn't. I really hope I'm strong enough never to do it. But I know the feeling. I know that sometimes when a woman comes in my office and she's been abused or she's been hurt or she's having a terrible time, I want to hug her. I won't do it, but I can feel that as if she was related to me. I would. If she was my daughter, I would immediately. But I don't. So that's part of who we are, and that's why the Orthodox community knows this, because the Torah tells us it. And it's what's funny is that even now, while this is going on in the world, society still thinks that we do this because women are inferior. I won't touch a woman I'm not married to because they're inferior. That's what society thinks we're doing, when it's clearly not what we're doing. I don't touch a woman that I'm not related to because I don't want that there should ever be an opportunity to do something I shouldn't do, because I respect her and I don't want to treat her like a sex object. And very often she is attractive to me, and I don't want to treat her that way. I want to be able to talk to her, to learn from her, to give over something to her, to get back, to have a intellectual, give and take. And I can't allow the physical to enter it. So Judaism has set up all of these rules to make it so that won't happen. And it's got nothing to do with a woman being inferior. It really has to do, although it sounds like apologetics, it has to do with men being inferior. Men will, I always say, if a man has the opportunity to abuse a woman, he's going to do it. He might force himself not to, but it will come to his mind. It will immediately, it definitely comes to his mind. Right? And that's really where it comes from. So, but nevertheless, God doesn't take those impulses away from us. He wants us to struggle with it, and he wants us to succeed. So that's why you have it with the Kohen, where he's not supposed to marry a divorced woman, not because there's anything wrong with the divorced woman, but because there's a perception. That perception's changed today, right? We don't really have this today anyways. I mean, you have Kohanim, can't do it, but they're not in the temple anymore. But the idea is that today's society has accepted that divorce happens, and it's not necessarily the woman's fault. Who works in marriage counseling, as I've done for 30 years, you know that it's never somebody's fault. It's everybody is participatory in this. And that you can't say that the woman is a witch because she's divorced, or that she is loose because now that she's divorced. And it's just not true. It just doesn't fit reality. It's a cartoon reproduction of a person. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment about perception. If Judaism's golden path is moderation, right, then I think that obviously stats show that somebody smokes, especially now, it's not like radio, but it's a mental health piece often, whether it's anxiety, stress, something going on. Same with alcohol as well. And obviously there's good addiction. And it's certainly not fair that some people can eat whatever they want and not exercise, but other people have to be careful. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's more of an indication that maybe something's not quite right, fairly or unfairly. And that's why people may, right, say, okay, the person's weight, there might be something out of sync. What's going on, right? Because if you care about yourself, then that involves self-care.
Right, but there are people who are naturally healthy, 30 pounds overweight. Mm-hmm. There are, right? And there are people who have all types of things, you know. You always hear the joke about the lady from the Ukraine who's 90 years old and tells you that she lived this long because she smoked a pack of cigarettes a day and drank whiskey every day and never had yogurt. So, you know, that it's an anomaly, but it does happen. But it's true. See, if we really go further, we can understand that when God puts your soul in your body, right? Your parents created your body, but God puts your soul in your body. He specifically picks a soul that fits your body. That is to say, your soul has flaws. We all have flaws in our soul. That's why we have to work on our character to be better people. So we all have these flaws. So God says, all right, you've been, in the circulation now for 3,000 years, and now I'm bringing you into this body, and you have a flaw in that I'm making it up, of course, you're flying, in that, you don't do well with discipline when it comes to, satiation, physical discipline. So he puts you in a body, right, that gains weight easily. And so now you have a struggle that you can physically see the effect of what your flaw is, and you work on yourself throughout your whole life to be able to fix that flaw without realizing it's a flaw. You're just thinking that God gave you this punishment that I gain weight easy, but you work at it, and then you're able to accomplish the goal, and you don't gain weight anymore because you worked at it. So it goes even so far that it's actually just. It fits you. Like whatever flaws we have is in your personality. It might not necessarily come out. You might know them, and they come out as tests that you have in the world. If you were, let's say, had problems with honesty in the past generations or however, and your soul has a flaw in that area, God might put you in a situation where you have access to a lot of money that's not yours, so that you should be tested and you should work on yourself not to fail. Right? There are all types of things like that. There's also positive sides. Why are some people born into wealthy families and some people aren't? It seems unjust. Right? But why could you have someone who's born into a family where they don't have to work for a living? They choose to because it's good for you, and it really helps you in many ways. But they don't have to. They don't have that worry, right? Of how am I going to pay the electric bill? They never have to worry about that. Well, there's something in their soul that they have to deal with that is affected. So for instance, like we know God wants to be good to us. So God wants all of us to be rich. All of us. He wants all to be healthy and all to be rich and all to have everything we want. But sometimes when we get what we want, it's actually bad for us. So God will then say, for you, if you're born rich, then you're going to be corrupt. I know you're going to be corrupt because you were corrupt throughout history. In your soul, you have this flaw. So I'm going to put you into a situation where you're not rich because you won't be able to handle it. I want you to now work on yourself to be able to live with wealth. So you will acquire it slowly, but you'll have to learn to be honest, or you'll have to learn to be diligent, or you'll have to learn to follow through or be responsible, whatever the issue was. So it goes all the way back to a metaphysical concept, a Kabbalistic concept of what's in our soul. And then it works itself through.
But do these flaws apply to Jews and non-Jews?
Yeah, everybody has flaws.
God does the flaws and the souls coming back for all religions.
Yeah, it's just that with us it's a bit more profound because we have the tools in the Torah ourselves. I don't have to, Mr. Pagan, who has no concept of this, I have to educate him as to what is real and what is true, and then I can help him work on his personality. Because we have, for instance, the world today, the average person today believes you cannot change. Yeah, an adult cannot change their personality. I get angry. It's how I am. Listen, my bark's worse than my bite. I never follow through on it. That's just how I am, and my wife knows it. My kids know it. Just don't ignore it, okay? We hear that all the time. That person, they're great. I love them, but they never follow through. They just never follow through. And well, they could learn to follow through. You can learn to train yourself in any area you want, but the world doesn't believe it. You can't teach an old horse new tricks. You can't teach an old dog to roll over. That's all false. It's all false, but the world believes it because they believe that you can't change who you are. And we believe you can. And that you have the ability to, and you're responsible to. So that's what we're here for. Many of our leading Jewish philosophers say the purpose of life is to improve yourself, not to improve your life, necessarily to improve yourself. If you get angry easily, to work on yourself that you don't. If you are dishonest with money, work on yourself to not be. Whatever the issue is that you have, work on yourself to not be that way, and you will accomplish it. Like this, and the world doesn't believe us. They really don't. The world doesn't think it. And you see, if a person did something wrong 25 years ago, they won't let them do it again. They won't put them in the same situation. Look what's happening with politicians today. 25 years ago, they got caught doing this or that. So how can we trust them today? Well, I understand it's not an unreasonable statement. So and now that politician has to prove to me why he's changed. But most people say he can't change. I'll say he can change, but he has to prove it because he already showed me he has a flaw, right? He's a criminal. So I has to show me that how he's no longer a criminal. But if he shows me he's no longer a criminal, I'll elect him. He has a lot to offer, but they have to do that. And the rest of the world will say, "Are you crazy? He was in jail. You want to have a governor or a minister or whatever who was a criminal?" Of course I don't. But I also know that people can change. And I also know that the only reason that they don't say it about me is because they don't know. I haven't been caught. I don't do those types of things, but I mean, I do things that are correct just like everybody else does. I have my flaws. I just thank God that the world doesn't know about them, and I work to try to fix them, and we all do. That's the essence. So that's taking us all the way from the end of the poem down to each one of us and how it really works with us, be it with gender politics, with religious politics, with racism, whatever it is. That's why we, like as Jews, for instance, when we say that you can't, that anybody can become a Jew, regardless of what your background is. You could have black Jews, Chinese Jews, Asian Jews, all kinds of people. Anti-Semites could become Jews. Right? Why? Because if a person wants to improve themselves and they see this as the path, we give them the opportunity. But we don't push them to. They don't push people to become Jewish, because you can also fix yourself, work on yourself, be a better person, be close to God, and not be Jewish. But if you want to, you can. If we'd say, well, listen, that guy's he's a criminal and he went to jail for 10 years and now he wants to be Jewish. Are you crazy? We have enough Jewish thieves. We don't need another one. But the fact is, that's not how we look at it. A person who was a thief can change. Sure, he might be tempted to do it again, but he can change. So that's basically how I see it. Do we have time to talk about Parsha?
I have one more question. If you're saying that everybody is judged by Hashem, so people who are Catholic and don't believe they're being judged by Hashem, they're going to believe that they're being judged by the
That's God. True, but God judges people in a just way, which means that if, let's say, imagine this. This is the Talmud gives this example, and it's a very prevalent Jewish concept in Jewish law. You have a Jewish city, little Jewish town in the middle of some country, and the non-Jews have a pogrom, and they come in and they attack the people. And they kill a couple who have a baby a boy who's 7 days old. He hasn't been circumcised yet. They take the baby and raise him as their own. So his baby lives his whole life as some type of a pagan or non-Jew, right? And he lives his whole life. He's 90 years old, he dies. He goes to heaven. God says, "You didn't keep Shabbos, you're going to hell." So what do you mean I didn't keep Shabbos? I'm not Jewish. He says, "Yes, you are." Well, what do you mean I'm Jewish? I'm not even circumcised. Well, you're going to hell for that too, because you are Jewish. But of course, that makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. That's the concept called the kidnapped child that the Talmud talks about. That's the extreme. What isn't extreme is that you have a Jew who's raised knowing they're Jewish, but have no idea what it means. They just think it means we eat bagels and lox and we're nice and we care for people and we believe in Israel and we try to be liberal, caring people, right? And that's a wonderful thing, but that's what they think, right? And then they die and they say, well, you ate chametz and Passover, so you're going to hell. So that's not just, right? God will never do that. If a person doesn't know, they're not held accountable, right? They also don't get reward for it, though, right? If that person by mistake didn't eat chametz on Passover, they don't get a reward for eating correctly because they didn't know it, but they don't get punished either, right? And so they're sort of left at that level, but they are rewarded for things that they understand. They understand a Jew is a good person. A Jew helps people. So they help people, they'll be rewarded for it. And so every person in the world, God judges them based on who they are. And so if you don't know that you're Jewish, and you don't know that you have to keep something, or you don't know that even if you're not Jewish, and you don't know what God expects of you, He doesn't hold you accountable unless you purposely don't know. Like I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. I've had some wonderful conversations with John Tory, the mayor of our city, right, or Toronto, and he's a wonderful man. He really is. He's really an ethical, caring person. I happen to also agree with a lot of his politics that I know, but even if you don't, as a person, he's a wonderful person. So he told me once we were having dinner here in the shul. It was for a shul event. He came, and he told me that according to Jewish law, he's Jewish. His mother and grandmother are Jews, but they converted 3 generations ago to Christianity, and they practice Christianity. So he says to me, I know that you believe I'm Jewish, but I don't believe I'm Jewish. Right? So is he even Shabbos? No, it's not. Because even though he has in his mind that the Jews think I'm Jewish, he thinks that he can choose. He thinks I was raised Episcopalian or whatever he is. I was raised that way. My parents are that way. I believe in it. How can I be held accountable for a philosophy I don't even understand? And it's true, you can't be. You're not going to be held accountable. I actually did see a picture of him with tefillin on once. The Lubavitchers went and got him to put tefillin on. And he really is Jewish, it's true. It is true. But he has no animosity about it. He doesn't, it's just for him, it's a interesting point of his background. That's all. He sees it as his background. Just like someone might say that 5 generations ago we were Italian. He says 4 generations ago we were Jewish. That's how he sees it. So that's how we look at it.
Hitler would think he's Jewish.
That's right. That's right. I hear that argument a lot from people. But he would be. And I'd be proud to have him. I mean, he's a very ethical person.
So if you
really.
know you're Jewish, you really have an extra responsibility.
Yep. But he went, when we had him speak for us once at a dinner, and he had a fee. He wasn't mayor then. I don't think you're allowed to take a fee when you're an elected official. And he told us up front to make the fee out to this Jewish charity, and the money went to the charity. And that's what he did with it. We should make the check out to that charity. He never wanted the check. He took it, but he didn't want to make it out to him that he should write a check. He wanted it directly to the charity. And it was a Jewish charity. So he's really a really special man. He should continue to do what he does. Right? So that's the story. That's what we had. So that didn't have a lot to do with our parsha, but hopefully it did tell us something. But there is one thing that I'll tell you without getting into the actual wording here. But one of the things that it speaks about in a few of these parshas is oil. It says that when Moshe was told by God that they were supposed to anoint the Kohanim, the priests, in order to prepare them. The Kohanim had like a ritual before, because they weren't Kohanim yet. They were born Kohanim, but there was never anything to do until they built the Mishkan. Now you've got a place where there's sacrifices offered, and the Kohen's job is now becoming real. So you had to now sort of install them as Kohanim. So they had the uniforms that they had to wear, and there was the special oil that Moshe had to make. The God instructed him, made out of these different types of spices, and then he would different parts of their body with this oil, and that was part of the ritual to get them ready. Moshe made X number of lube is, let's say, a gallon. I don't know exactly what size it is, but it's a certain size. Let's say it's a gallon of oil. He had to make 20 gallons of this oil in order to anoint all the Kohanim. But it says that the oil that Moshe made will be used to anoint Kohanim forever. The Kohanim in the future, the third temple, will use the oil that Moshe made. So you say, okay, that's a nice miracle. And Moshe made so much that it's hidden somewhere. When the temple is built, we'll find it. But they asked the question, like, why make this miracle? What's the purpose? You could have said that because it's hinted at that he didn't make that much. Right? That the oil sort of like regenerates itself. Right? So the commentaries say that's not what happens at all. What happens is that when he would anoint the oil, you'd think that what happens is that the oil is sort of energizing the Kohen into his position. So just like anything else in the physical world, it becomes consumed. The oil will be consumed because the oil is making the Kohen holy. Right? But they said that's not true. The Kohanim, people are holy. People are innately have the ability to be holy. The oil doesn't make you holy. The oil is a conduit. And therefore, the oil was not consumed. So he would put the oil on them, but the oil would always be there. So, so to speak, that he could take it back. Because the Kohen, it wasn't the oil that made the Kohen holy. It was the Kohen who made the Kohen holy. It was the oil that put him in the environment where he chose to be holy. And therefore, the oil would always live, would always stay. And we would always be able to use it because the oil was never consumed. The point is that we as human beings have the ability to be holy people. it's up to us. Like, I can choose to do this. I choose to live my life in a way where I represent God in everything I do, or I can choose not to. But I'm the only one who can choose it. It's up to me. It's not, you can't make me do it. You can't give me a pill to do it. You can't give me a certain uniform to do it. You can't put oil on me to do it. It's up to me to do it. If I do it, then I'm holy. If I don't do it, you can stand on your head and pour oil all over me, and it won't help. It's up to me. And that's really a very significant message that the Torah gives us, right, in the general concept of what a Kohen is. It has all the specifics, the different things that they wore and why they wore it, and what message that was sending, and the rules they had and what that sends. But the fact that they were holy had nothing to do with anything you did to them or with them. It was totally based on their inner desire to be holy, and the ability that God puts within a human being to be that way, which means that every one of us can do the same thing. You won't be a Kohen, but you can be holy. And we meet, I'm hopefully, we meet people like this. I've been fortunate in my life to be able to meet some of the greatest Jewish leaders that were alive as I was growing up. I actually had the chutzpah, I say, to do it, because I went out of my way to do it. I would go and sort of waste their time and go meet them because I wanted to. It wasn't wasting my time at all, but maybe for them it was. But you get to see people where, like I tell a story sometimes about how my mother and I went to New York this time of year before Passover, because where we lived, it was a small town, and there wasn't, certainly back then in the 70s, there wasn't access to all of the stuff you needed for Passover. And you had to go to New York. That's where everything was. So I was always a big thing for me to be able to go to New York. So my mother and I would drive down to New York, 6 hours back then it took, and we'd go into Brooklyn and we'd buy all the stuff, right? And I decided, well, if we're going to go, I want to go see Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He was the greatest rabbi of the time. He was a man about 4'10", lived in the Lower East Side of New York, had been there for decades, and was world known in many, many different areas of knowledge and personal, the way that he acted, of his personal character, of who he was. So I wanted to meet him. So I decided I'd come up with some questions to ask him, so I could meet him. So I came up with some questions, and I wrote a letter and asked if I could come, and he said, his assistant was his grandson, wrote me back, yeah, you can come. And on this day, whenever you come is fine. So on that day was the day that we were going by, so we went. So my mother and I went, right? So we go, and so my mother's we're in his apartment, so it was in his living room, and he had an office. So we go into it's like in a project. He wasn't a wealthy man. So my mother's in the living room, sitting there waiting, and I go into his office, and I'm in there with his grandson and him. And I asked my questions, and we talked. And then I said, my mother asked if she could meet you. Would you speak to my mother? Sometimes you had that they didn't speak with women for whatever reason. But so of course, he would. So I went out, and I told my mother that she should go in. So he went and he spoke to her, and they talked. My mother was German, and my mother spoke to him in German, and he answered in German, which was pretty amazing because he was Lithuanian, right? And so his native language was Yiddish, and the second language was English. But yet, I guess when you lived in Europe, you picked up these things. So he spoke to her in German, and then she said to him, after they had their conversation, she said, "Can I make a personal comment?" She asked him, and then this was being told to me by his grandson afterwards, but my mother told me also later. So he said, "Okay," and he had no idea what she was going to say. Right? And she said, "I wish that at my age now, that my skin should glow like yours does at your age." Because now, why was that so remarkable? Was because we have a concept that we read already that Moshe, when he came down from Mount Sinai, he had beams of light that came out of his head. Right? That's why the artist drew him with horns. Right? It's because it's called carne or horns of light, or beams of light. They didn't have beams then. They called them horns of light because he had so much holiness that it was like coming out of him. So like it says that when Moshe spoke to the Jewish people, he put a bag over his head because they were scared to talk to him because his face glowed like a light because he had so much holiness in him which is not normal, right? I mean, it's because Moshe talked to God face to face. It was a little different. So my mother noticed that we have a concept called Hadras Panim, a glowing face, that the great rabbis, even of our time, they have a little taste of this, where you look at them and they look different. They look like bright. Something about them. So my mother, who was uneducated, she was a survivor. She never had an education. So she saw this. So she thought he just had nice skin. So she told him, right? And he was, he wasn't embarrassed really. He was not used to being complimented like that and his physical appearance. Right? People didn't talk to him that way. So his grandson told me that, so why I'm telling you the story is because my mother saw on him, right, that he was special. There was something special about him. She knew that he was the greatest legal authority, and she knew that he was known for his righteousness and how he cared for people and how, he would do anything he could, like when you had like agunas, women who couldn't get divorced. He would do everything he could to try to free them. And he worried for night after night after night to try to find ways to help these people. She had no idea about any of this. All she knew is she saw something and it was there. So I'm describing it because that's what we saw. The holiness was coming through, and you could actually see it on him. Right? When you looked at him, you could see it. Moshe had that, and many other people had that, and so even my mother in the 1970s, she saw that on him. I saw it also, but I didn't think to comment, right? It's embarrassing. I said, I see you're a very righteous man, Rabbi. Yeah. And then even more so, that's because he understood what she meant, but she didn't know what she meant. But then we're saying, I think that your skin is very, very pretty, right? That also it was something he wasn't used to hearing, but she meant it in the right way, and he took it that way. And that's how they were. So people even today we have the effect of holiness on us. And if you work on yourself, you can be that way. You can, be that kind of person that people want to be close to, that want to talk to, that they're drawn to you because they see that holiness. They don't necessarily know what they're seeing. They just see something about you that they want to emulate you. They want to be close. That's what it means to be. We say that Jews are supposed to be a light unto nations. It's a very funny expression. What does that mean? You're a light to nations. Every other religion that uses this says that's why they're missionaries. They go out to the nations and they missionize. We don't missionize, but yet we're the light to the nations. And the answer is because if you go in a dark room and you turn on a light, everybody looks at the light. They don't just see the light, but they look at the bulb. They immediately you turn the light. Everybody looks right at the source of the light. And that's what it means. The Torah says, you don't have to go out into the world and change and make people, that be like you. Be like you, right? Make a Jewish community where widows, right, don't die and nobody notices, or that old men who can't cut their grass anymore, their grass grows 3 feet high, or divorced women who have no income are going to starve to death. Make a community where they're taken care of. Make a community where you watch out for each other, where the kids can play in the street because no one's going to hurt them, right? Make a community like that. And then people who live around you, they're going to start noticing it. They're going to say, wait a minute, we want to live there too. But it's more expensive to live there. We don't care. We want to live there too. And they move in. And then suddenly it gets bigger and it gets bigger and bigger. And Jews might say, oh no, you got all these non-Jews coming and living in our neighborhood. But the reality is if you're acting correctly, they want to be like you. They don't necessarily know why. They just say, look how wonderful this community is, how these people take care of each other. We want to be a part of it. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, that's being a light unto the nations. It doesn't mean you go out and tell people, believe what I believe. It means act the way you're supposed to act, and people will see you, and they'll act like you. They'll say, I want, when my mother gets old, that I don't have to put her in a home. Someone's going to watch out for her. I want that to happen. So they'll live in a neighborhood where that happens. Right? We all know about small towns and little places are like this. Like you imagine if you have like in the middle of New York City, you have a group like this. But it's not like that. It's sad, but it should be. That's what the Jewish community is supposed to be like. That poor people can be there and they're taken care of, and people with all types of problems are there and they're taken care of, and people care, and you don't see a car accident on the street and not go out and help. or a fire, and take out your camera and take pictures of it. And you go out and you help. People help. That's what a community is supposed to be, and that's how we're supposed to be. That's the emulation of Judaism in the real world. Of each one of us acting correctly, living with each other that act correctly, and then people will flock to us, and they'll be like us, and then the world changes. And it's the only way that it can work. It's not by our proselytizing it won't work. It's only by them wanting to be like us. And that's pretty much it. So I didn't really talk much about Parsha, a little bit. So, but I hope so. We did conclude with this, the second book of the Torah. We're going to start Vayikra, the third book, which is, and interestingly enough, I find that the end of the second book and almost the entire third book are very mundane. If you just read it, it's like what the Kohanim wore, and how do you do this sacrifice and that sacrifice, and how do you build this wall in the Mishkan and that wall in the Mishkan. It's pretty mundane. Like if you're an engineer, maybe you'll find it interesting, but I'm much more interested in the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Moses and all these people. And they're basically, this is basically God telling you, you have to build this way, and you have to travel this way, and you have to wear this kind of outfit and that kind. And it seems very mundane. But what happens is that when you read it and you understand the commentaries, it's an example of the Torah having so many levels that you start peeling it back, and you can see a much deeper level. While the story of Abraham is inspiring on the basic level, like a 5-year-old can be inspired by Abraham. A 5-year-old will not be inspired by next week's Parsha. But an adult will peel back the first level of what it says and start to see the deeper meaning in it, is going to be amazed by it. And so that's what we're going to try to do, is to look at it a bit deeper, to find that meaning that's hidden in the Torah. Because the Torah is it's written by God. It's extraordinarily deep. If most of us, like when I was in graduate school, I studied literature. So I studied Dostoevsky, and I studied some Shakespeare, and Dickens and Forsyth, all different writers, new and ancient, and the earlier they were in history, the later from us, like in the centuries ago, you could read their books on many levels. Like have you ever read let's say Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Right? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for the most part, sounds like a horror story, right? But it's not. It's actually written as an exploration into the desire for a human to do good, and a desire for a human to do what they want to do. So that's Jekyll and Hyde. Or you see it with every Gulliver's Travels is a political statement, right? And it sounds like a nice story, but it's not. It's political. All of these have many meanings. So if we understand that a human being can write a book with maybe 3 meanings, you can imagine when the Talmud says that God gave us a Torah, it's endless, but every part of the Torah can at least be understood 70 ways, right? And therefore, you have so much depth within it. It's hard to find that in like the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's very easy in this chapter of creation, right? Because on a simple level, you don't understand a word it's talking about. That how could God? It says that it was evening, it was morning the first day, but God didn't create the sun or the moon till the 3rd day. So how do you have evening and morning 2 days before you have the sun and the moon? You have to study it very deeply to understand it. So we're going to have to do the same here to get anything out of it, so that we're not bored. Okay. All right. So we better stop there. I'm starting to get messages. Thank you.